Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever in the world you're joining us from, whatever time it currently is where you are. Welcome to the inaugural Alpha Film Festival, a collaborative venture between Weltwunder's MILC Metaverse and the international reviews platform, The Film Verdict. My name is Ben Nicholson. I'm the Film Verdict's chief short film critic and the artistic director here at Alpha Film Festival, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this panel discussion about interactive storytelling. Before I hand over to my Film Verdict colleague, Daniel Gusinski, who will be moderating tonight's discussion, I just wanted to remind you all about the other parts of the festival that you can still enjoy. Inside the MILC Art Tower, you will find 12 films that comprise our official selection. These are a dozen shorts that cover a breadth of styles, genres, and mediums, and that engage in a variety of different ways with this year's festival theme, The Future. Films are available to watch at your leisure until the festival ends on Tuesday, and we strongly encourage you to participate in voting for your favourites, with the most popular film receiving the Alpha Film Festival's very first Audience Award. The intersection of cinema and gaming is only getting more and more interesting. The boundaries between these two forms are becoming ever more blurred. And so we are delighted to have tonight's discussion about that very intermediate space. Without further ado, I will pass over to Daniel to introduce our guests and to kick off the conversation. Enjoy.
Hello, and thank you so much for joining us again. My name is Daniel Gusinski, and I'm a writer and just fan of video games, period. And I'm really excited to be here to talk to just a whole host of incredibly talented individuals that are willing to set aside an hour of their time to essentially share their experiences and their thoughts on what I would call new media. And that's going to be our first topic of conversation. What is new media? Why is it relevant to games? And are games the first form of this new media, quote unquote? It's defined by interaction, and games are defined by interaction. And here's this intersectionality between interaction and film that we are witnessing at AFF and other film festivals around the world. So just to start us off, and I'm going to just open up the conversation here. What is new media to everyone here? What do they view as this new intersection? And why is it so interesting for everyone here to engage with it? But before I even get into that, I want to quickly shout out every single person here with us. We have Dulull from Hazimation. We have Grace Chadwick and Harry Chadwick at Interflix Media. And we have Sam Barlow of Half Mermaid. Each one of these creatives are people that have made their imprint on the industry as a whole and are here to essentially share with us their influence and their wonderful work and just their pioneering thoughts on this new media. So anyway, without further ado, if you want to start us off here, Harry, what exactly is new media to you and why is it so captivating?
I knew you were going to come to me, Daniel. It's so captivating because for me, essentially what we're doing is giving our audiences choice. And I think that's really exciting. I think coming at it from a film perspective and what you were saying about the two intertwining, it's about giving audiences control over where the story goes. When we're talking about it relatively interactive film, Grace and I usually say that it's a natural evolution of the choose your own adventure books, and that's how we started off writing scripts. You know, it really, turn to page 7, you read a section, you have choices, turn to page 38, and then essentially you take that concept and go and film it. And I think that's what's really exciting. It's giving the audience that ability to choose where the story goes and go down different avenues, and everyone on this panel has created and developed and produced work that kind of reflects that, and it's really exciting to be part of it. So thank you very much for having us.
Of course. What about you, Haz? Do you agree with everything Harry says? Do you think that he's completely 100% wrong in his understanding of it? What is your take here?
Harry's my new BFF now, so I can't say that. No, I mean, 100% agree with Harry. In fact, we had a good conversation at EFM when we both met for the first time, and we had that exact conversation. For me, like, new media is not really so much about the audience, because obviously Harry's covered that. For me, new media is about being disruptive especially in the industry, which is the filmmaking industry that I come from, where it's still it's very traditional, very legacy based. And like, you know, we made it an entire animated feature film entirely out of a game engine. So essentially we made a big cinematic out of but 93 minutes out of Unreal Engine. And we felt that that form of new media is disrupted the way we're making movies. So I come from more of a production, like in terms of how we're making films. I find that this new media where we're taking a video game engine for interactivity and change the way we produce movies, which means like we wouldn't spend like months going backwards and forwards on a typical animated shots. We can just do stuff in real time. As a director, I can shoot all of my shots using virtual production, using an iPad, and shoot all in my living room as a cinematographer and get all of those shots in there. I can get feedback from an executive all in real time. We're doing dailies in Unreal Engine, making changes. That to me is what new media is in terms of democratizing the way films are being made.
100%. Grace, I know that you likely agree with Harry here, but I would love to hear your take on it anyway. Do you want to add on anything here?
Yeah, no, I think exactly what Haz and Harry have both just said, especially sort of bouncing off what Haz has just said. I think the reason why a lot of us do what we do is about the disruption. And just, you know, especially, I know some of us come from more of a gaming background, but Harry and I very much from the film space. It has been so rooted in tradition for so long. And, you know, when we speak to people, naturally, the barrier to entry is education around what we're doing. And we also, you know, we speak to people where they just don't get it because it just isn't in their zeitgeist. But we speak to people that absolutely love it and want to know everything about it, even though they are from the traditional filming background. So yeah, it's a really exciting space, and it takes a lot of guts as creatives to sort of try and disrupt an area that has been the same for so many years. So it's great to speak to guys like Sam and Haz on today's panel as well to build this new medium.
Definitely. And last but not least, I would love to hear your thoughts on it as well, Sam. You know, back in my undergrad, my first ever game design course, we played Her Story. So it only makes sense that you're here to tell us, you know, or tell me anyway, your take on interactive media and just new media in general and how your kind of pioneered style here engages with that.
I guess if I'm the last, I can be slightly contrarian. So I think like new media is a dangerous term because things are only new very briefly, right? And I think like even if you look at film, to look at film, like it's constantly reinventing itself constantly. There is technical change. Even like if I speak to a DP, like from film to film, they're reinventing what rig they use, right? They're changing what camera they might use, and the technology is kind of constantly moving. So I think things, you know, throughout the history of storytelling, there has always been kind of interesting kind of technological change. Clearly, from time to time, there are kind of more revolutionary leaps. And I think like when I try and justify what I'm doing, I look at like the 20th century, which to me was, if you step back, like a century that was kind of defined by broadcast media. Right, we, you know, at various points we had these huge revolutions where you had like the printing press, where suddenly, you know, the printed word went from being this very boutique special thing to being something that could be distributed widely, right? And then you could suddenly have kind of mass storytelling of authors sending out their work. But in the 20th century, you know, you had radio, but then you had television and you had movies, and suddenly you had this ability to tell a story, have an individual, you know, author a story and create it and then tell that story to an unprecedented audience size. There's a wonderful anecdote that just like blows my mind. Even I tell people it all the time, it still blows my mind. But Orson Welles did a TV performance of, I'm probably wrong with the play because I never go back and check, but I'm going to say The Tempest. So Orson Welles did a live TV version of The Tempest. And when that show was broadcast on American television, more people watched that telecast of The Tempest than had ever seen it performed live in the entire history of the universe prior to that, right? So you see there's this just complete difference in scale that comes with this broadcast technology. But the thing that I'm mindful of, kind of having grown up with personal computers and kind of, you know, fiddling around with text adventures and all sorts sort of from the get-go, is you look at all that media and it is static, right? The opportunities of broadcast have these limitations. If I want to broadcast an episode of television live to the world, it has to be the same episode, because that's how broadcast works. If I'm printing a book, we need to write the book, have it typeset, have it printed. Everyone's now reading the same book. And prior to that, it wasn't the case, right? Like way back when we were telling stories through oral tradition, stories were passed from person to person. They would change in the telling. Even if you weren't necessarily changing the story, like a live theatrical performance, there is a feedback loop with the audience where things have a life to them. So you kind of went from storytelling being quite organic and kind of intimate to the person who's having the story told to them, and you lost that a little bit with broadcast, to the point where when you're editing a movie, in some cases, if you want a large audience, you're kind of editing it to the lowest common denominator, right? And to produce that final cut of the movie that is the one that will go out. And so for me, if there is a big change or a big revolution that we are now capable of, and I think we're literally capable of it now, it is combining the wonder of broadcast, of being able to reach millions of people, with the idea of storytelling being more intimate, being more personal, being something where everyone that has the story told to them is having a different experience, is bringing something of themselves into it. So that's kind of where I've been noodling around, and certainly from a kind of games perspective, which is where I started. A lot of the assumptions around storytelling and games and interactivity is that it is kind of about role playing, and it is about empowering me to be the author, or for the kind of dream of the holodeck where I just step out and the story just happens and I'm completely in control. To me, that's been slightly less interesting to me, versus as an author, how do I create a more intimate relationship between me and the audience? How can I create something where I bring the audience closer to the creative process, and kind of make it feel more intimate again? So that's my take. I think I spoke too long.
So that's a really interesting point here. Like, would you then say that this? I guess the reason I call it new media is because it encompasses just so much modern tech that otherwise likely wasn't necessarily available beforehand. But you're right. New media can only be new for so long. Would you agree then to call it like interactive media? But even that may not fully encompass what it is either.
There's a really good talk that Brian Moriarty, who was one of the pioneers at IFCOM, gave a few years back in New York, where he gave people this little potted history of interactive movies. And it went all the way back, right, to, oh crap, my brain is failing me now. The fantastic showman producer who did a lot of these kind of gimmicky horror movies. He would put buzzers under chairs so that when someone was attacked by a giant centipede on screen, your chair would buzz and people would freak out. But he did this one movie where at the end of the movie, the audience had to hold up and vote as to whether the character should be punished or forgiven. And that, Taught American was a big hit. The trick to that was he just assumed that everyone would want to punish the guy. So it was, in fact, just a completely static movie, just with 5 minutes where the audience were voting. And I think it was proved right. But and there was a German experiment called Kinomat, I think. But it's always surprising. And once, when I made Her Story and started attending arts festivals and things and seeing how much was going on in the kind of interactive space, and I'd always been obsessed with kind of installation art and video art things anyway, there's always more out there than you realize, right? So I think there's always been this tradition and this desire to make things that are kind of interactive and mechanical. I think obviously the the fidelity and the tools we have now is obviously much greater.
It almost seems like the tech is what is that bridge that really is starting to connect people. As you say, your goal here is to connect audience to material, and actually the individual experience is really important. And that's what I actually want to like bridge this conversation into, is that to me, the two things that stand out in this interactive entertainment, this new form, if you will, this postmodern entertainment, is activism and individuality. These two things are almost intrinsic to every single one of these kinds of new creations that I engage with. These terms feel opposing sometimes, but in this art form, they seem to be interlinked. You promote action and unique experience. I know even for Interflix Media, one of the things that you guys mentioned on your website is a unique experience as like a core feature. So can you guys speak more to the possibilities present when offering a wholly unique moment-to-moment experience for every player or viewer? What does it mean to be able to craft your own story? What are the positives and negatives that come out of that? What are the new kind of systems of engagement you have to really engage with or create? Harry, you can start us off again.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with what Sam was saying about making it individual to the audience and bringing the audience closer, because I feel with interactive media or new media, as you're saying, you're part and parcel of that creation, and so it becomes more about the path that you took or the journey that you went on, rather than the form itself. When you go to a cinema, everyone has a different and unique experience because they empathize with characters differently, but essentially the format is the same and it's received in the same way. Whereas with this, interactive media or new media or gaming, you create the world itself as it plays out, and you're able to then take different experiences depending upon the path that you went down, and therefore it becomes more individual to you as a consumer and as an audience member. You feel like you've become part of that creation, and hopefully it allows you to empathize with those characters on another level, having agency over them, and allows you to sort of get involved with the story on a deeper level. Perhaps that's why we're here, and that's why we're trying the format in these different ways.
What about you, Haz? Do you agree there? I know that Sam felt like I need to be the contrarian here, but it feels like what he said is 100% accurate. I think we all agree, and it was a really interesting kind of a point that he brought up. So, do you agree, disagree? Do you think that?
No, I mean, just going off what Sam said, for me, my first interactive movie experience was a game called Night Trap on Mega CD, and if you guys remember that, kind of shows that age a bit. But I remember seeing that, and that was just basic. That was super basic, but I was just blown away by the fact that that I could watch live action in a computer game. Then there's this console called Philips CDI that came out, and it had more of those kind of live action-y stuff, and there was tons of CD-ROMs involved. But then for me, I started my career in video games because I wanted to make movies, and I didn't go to film school. So I did what you call FMV, full motion videos, or they're cinematic sequences, right? Not game footage. And then from there, I ended up going into film. And now I feel like my career has gone full circle, because now I'm making video games, or I'm using video game technology to tell movies. And for me, in order to get the story to a wider audience, obviously you have the 93-minute movie, but we end up making a video game simultaneously while making the movie. And the reason we did that wasn't because hey, we're in Unreal Engine, why not? It was mainly because me and the screenwriter, Stavros Pambalis, who wrote the script for Rift, there were so many pages that just went on the cutting floor, because there's so much you can fit in 93 minutes of cinema, right? And we're like, well, this is a movie about multiverses. There are so many what if questions. What if the character didn't go through that door? What if this character did live? I'm trying to do this without spoiling anything in the movie, by the way. But what if we, and we're like, well, we have all the game assets. We're in a game engine. Why don't we just spend time hiring a bunch of good game developers, good combat designers, and I can game direct it. And we end up doing the game, and we're doing stuff in the game that we would not have been possible to do in the movie. We're doing storylines. Obviously, it's branch narrative, right? But we end up doing so much in the story in the game, which I personally feel like the game has a better narrative than the movie, because the movie's linear, right? It's only so much you can do. And that kind of opened the minds, because now I'm thinking like there's other directors that I speak to and other filmmakers that I speak to that are looking to use Unreal Engine, whether it's a full animated film or whether it's a hybrid. And they're like, well, yeah, you know, we could tell our stories in video games now in a way that could extend the life shelf of a linear story. So that's kind of the route I've taken. Instead of like saying, I'm going to make a video game with this narrative, I've kind of made a movie, but I want to extend the life shelf and extend the story and get the audience to experience the story in a different way you can of a movie or as an accompany. That's allowed me to really expand they call it vertical slices, right? But really expand the longevity of my storyline. And it just allowed me to keep playing in that same sandbox. Like, because when you make a movie, it's ended. Unless you get a franchise deal or a sequel, it's ended, right? Whereas in this, I'm like, I can just keep exploring. I have all my game assets, I have my game characters, I have my world. I need to focus on story and narrative. And how do I put that in the hands of the audience, which is completely different? Because obviously in a movie, like, you know, you said, Sam, like, it's linear, right? You know, it's passive, you're just watching it. Whereas in a game, there's so much more variables involved when you're making a game compared to a movie.
It seems like I'm sorry, Sam, please.
I was gonna say, you make a good point in you know, the limitations of a movie, right? You only have 90 minutes, or if you're a big Marvel movie, you have a few more minutes. But and like that limit defines so much, right? If you go and see a screenwriting guru and they break you down into a 3-act structure or whatever and explain, you know, Save the Cat says on page 10, this has to happen. These are all properties of the physical limitations of movies, in that there was a length to a reel and you only had so many reels, and the human bladder can only, you know, withstand so much torture, and movie theaters need to have films on a rotation, right? So that's why movies are 90 minutes long. And similarly, there's a reason why television shows are like either 30 minutes for comedy or 60 minutes without breaks or whatever, right? These structures exist. And even kind of beyond that, like the number one question I get asked is like, well, how do your things work in stories if the ordering can be changed, right? Because doesn't that break the plot? And I think the big thing for me is that plot really is a necessity in a movie, because, like, as Peter Greenaway says, like, the act of watching a movie is not what human beings are designed for. You sit in a dark room, you stare straight forwards for 90 minutes, you can't move. You have to keep your head focused on this thing. Like, you have to try and deny that you have this physical body. And obviously, if your back starts to hurt, or if your bladder does start to pester you, it's going to distract you from the movie. So a movie needs to constantly keep you engaged so that you're focused on the world of the movie and not everything else that's going on, right? So you have plot, which is what happens next, what happens next, what happens next, constantly pointing the camera, keeping your eye on what happens next, so that you don't kind of come out of the world of the movie. Now, as soon as you go into the interactive space, there's like cheap stuff, right? Like, just the fact that I'm interacting with a controller or a keyboard is telling my body, well, I'm doing things. My brain is processing stuff. It's telling my hands to do things. I'm physically interacting. This is real, right? Like, my body is being engaged. I'm not having to deny the existence of my body. So there's already like a basic kind of physical interactivity. But as soon as you step outside the bounds of that 90 minutes, and, you know, you see this a little bit with the new media-ness of like a Netflix, right? Where they're like, oh, an episode of Stranger Things can be 2 hours long. It doesn't have to be an hour long, because we don't have ad breaks, and people can pause it. And, you know, it's not being broadcast live, so no one's going to miss this. If they need to go to the bathroom, they can just hit pause. So you're already seeing them kind of play with the edges of this idea of what is the container. But ultimately, you know, that when you then become free from plot, you know, in my games, people have the ability to explore. They have the ability to express themselves in how they explore. That engages you. So that means you can do away with the strictness of the plot, and the player starts to kind of create their own definition. So then, like you're saying, with this idea that in creating a story, you have more than 90 minutes worth of stuff, right? that's what I sometimes think of my games as being more novelistic than like movies, because you can just have this stuff, right? It's like, oh, there's this interesting thing about this character, or there's this scene that, oh shit, if we had to fit this into 90 minutes and everything had to be like a plot, this wouldn't work. But the player who's in control, maybe they're chilling, they're like deeply immersed in this, they're interested in this particular character, they want to just chill in this stuff that's B or C plot and just kind of explore that and noodle around in this. And then if they're like, oh, actually, no, I need some action now, they have the power to then kind of swing things back to the A plot, right? And to kind of define things. So I think like that to me is like a big, exciting thing that I wish we saw more of, which is like and it's, I remember like famously like Roger Ebert, before he died, like had some thoughts on how games could never be art because of the nature of art and choice. But the thing that always I never understood with that is that, you know, Roger Ebert knew a lot about movies, and the idea that a movie is a specific authored piece falls apart if you just rewind to the second before the movie is released. Right? Because right up till a movie is released, it's being edited and changed. You write a script, you go to shoot it. In rehearsal, you change lines. Oh, crap, we have to cast this different actor. Now, oh, my idea of the character has changed. You get in, oh, we lost this location for the day. Could you quickly rewrite this scene to make sense if we shoot it in a diner instead? And then once you finish shooting it, as you know, every filmmaker that I speak to will say to me, like, you don't really start writing a movie until you get into the editing suite. Because then in how you edit it and compose it, you're changing the story. And then, you know, if it's a Marvel movie, you're going to go show that movie to a bunch of people, get their thoughts. Then you're going to go and reshoot and you're going to change it, right? And so these movies are constantly in flux. Even so, you think of like Stanley Kubrick as being the great auteur. He would release his movies and then continue to edit them and send out new copies of his movies. Like, you know, so the idea that we've kind of become conditioned to, that there is like a kind of, you know, there's an exact perfect cut of a movie. Maybe that's the director's cut they release after it's out. But, you know, but if you rewind, there's this fascinating flux where there are alternatives. There is more material than perhaps makes it to the screen. One of my favorite movies, Double Life of Veronique by Kieslowski, he cut like 30 different versions of this movie. He just couldn't figure out like what the configuration should be, and he actually pushed to, I think it was Miramax and the Weinsteins. He was like, can we just put out 30 different versions of this movie and have a different version in each cinema? And they went so far with it until they got to the kind of financial practicalities of actually distributing different prints of this movie. But, you know, so that for me is that is a limitation that we've had with the previous containers, with the previous technology, that suddenly allows stories to breathe a little more and have a little bit more life to them.
I think just to go off a quote, I think Jack Nicholson said when working with Stanley Kubrick that he gave up reading the script because Kubrick would change it daily on set for The Shining. I think where Sam and Haz are creating products, we fall in a slightly different camp in the sense that Grace and I are still developing. We're still kind of tied to that pacing and that structure that we need to adhere to, because with the interactive film, we do only have a certain sort of runtime that we want to hit. So then it's about how we tackle that concept where if the audience do go left and they do follow a side character, how does that have a satisfying conclusion in terms of multiple different endings? And I think that's kind of an interesting way, Sam, that you've tackled interactive content, allowing it to breathe, and Her Story and Immortality, you can take it at your own pace. And we had but we're able to slightly work with that. It doesn't quite work with pacing, but our dear DP Ravenna Tran came up with the concept of having the main character just being able to sit. So as a homage to video games, you can just click sit, and Michael Xavier will just sit in a really nice picturesque view, and it just loops. And then whenever you want to come out of it, you can come out of it, or check his wallet and open it up. So we're allowed to play with it slightly in how we're tackling it, but not on the sort of grander scale of game design.
But even previous though, like just going off what both you're saying, Sam and Harry, like in terms of like like I think Sam, you mentioned about like movies being made several times. You know, there's always that saying, you make the movie like, you know, when you write it, shoot it, and edit, right, and way more. But also we have previs, right? Like, so I did a show for Disney in 2019 called Fast Lane, and it was a car chase sequence. I did the pilot, and it was a very new type of show. And these are like Disney executives, and they're so used to like, you know, doing things a certain way, a studio way. And I spent time in my hotel and I previs the entire friggin' episode just with like basic dummy characters. But I also had Alt 1, Alt 2, Alt 3, different alternate versions of the shot. So I'll be sitting with the showrunner and say, hey, look, this is how I want to pull the shots. What do you think? And the showrunner was like, well, yeah, but you know, the character wouldn't do that. The character would be sitting down. I'm like, okay, cool. Now quickly just move the character sitting down. And even though that's not a video game, it felt like a video game to the showrunner, because the showrunner was like, wait, so hang on. Can you change the lens? I'm like, yeah, just change the lens. Actually, you know what? I'll give you a wide shot and 2 close-ups. And he's like, all of a sudden, he's like, this is freaking amazing. And in my mind, I'm like, dude, it's previs. We've been doing this for a long time. So that level of immersiveness and interaction also goes right back to the way films are being produced as well. You know, having that level of interactivity. That's why, you know, things like real-time game engines come in super useful. And Sam, just so you know, and I'm sure you know this, but Marvel previs a lot of their movies entirely on the computer and screen test them as well. Yeah. That's a whole nother level of screen testing. So yeah, and that's even before a director comes on as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I think
the previs process is the nearest thing I've seen to making a video game. Yeah. Right? When you look into like a Pixar or something where they actually take the process seriously, like, oh yeah, I get it. This is like, yeah, we're hitting gray box level. There's like vertical slice, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to iterate this and everything. And then you go and cast your celebrity voice actors. They come in and want to change it or whatever. There was an interesting. I can't remember where I read this article, but there was a point that happened in Hollywood where the reliance on CGI shifted, and prior to that point, the financial model of the studios was such that like you could reliably expect to not lose too much money on a movie because no matter how badly a movie was going, you could parachute in a new director, you could get the thing finished, get it in a can. It couldn't run beyond, you know, so far. And then you would have a movie which you could still put on airplanes and, you know, put out on video or whatever. But as soon as CGI became, you know, every other shot, say, of a Marvel movie, all of the problems of video gaming became the problems of Hollywood, because suddenly everyone's, you know, underbidding for something that's using innovative technologies, and you get to the point where they're having to like hire 10 VFX houses to get the work done because otherwise they're going to miss their deadline, and then they have to delay it, and just and the fact as well that like the beauty of like a classic movie is it is made in the editing suite, because at that point you have all the footage you're ever going to have, and so then you're making hard choices and clever choices. But now, no, like now, oh, we can just move this character, we'll refilm some stuff against a green screen, we'll add. I spoke to an actor that like had a digital tear added for one of their big performances, and it like freaked them out because they were like, I think there was a famous actor, I'm forgetting who it was, who actually had it written into his contract because he was in a movie where they did add like a digital tear or something. Wow. And he was so upset because he was like, that wasn't my performance, that he had in all his future contracts written in that they weren't allowed to do that. But you suddenly instantly had this issue where now in Hollywood, a movie was never finished because you could always tweak it. You could always make something better. You could always change a shot. You could always, and obviously then all the decision makers and everyone pile in, and suddenly movies can now, you know, stretch and cost, you know, 3-4 times what they could.
Grace, do you have anything, any thoughts on this? I would love to hear your opinions on like just
I was
the
literally
general
just
change
thinking just from a production point of view, where Sam was just saying that it, you know, can cost enough, you know, keep going. It's so like that with what Harry and I do in terms of, you know, Harry was coming back and talking about how Haz approaches his, you know, animation, and he was saying sort of, I can't believe that you guys shoot that much and we don't have the ability to go back. So on our production, The Tide, I think we shot 722 scenes in 5 weeks, which was essentially 3 feature films. And so although all of this sounds so wonderful and it's such an exciting new space to be in, there are, not to be negative, but so many challenges that go along with what we're doing, because we are trying to push the boundaries so far, that I think as filmmakers, we are essentially being unbelievably brave with the budgets that we sort of can achieve with this new media. Sort of what Sam was saying there, and just, you know, just keep going and going and going. That thought just sort of popped into my head. It's something as a producer that Harry comes up with all of these elaborate branching narratives, and I go, crap, okay, we've only got X amount to shoot.
When we have Marvel budgets, I'm sure we can take it to the next level.
Yeah. So I'm envious.
The production side is,
and being able to just go, oh, we've got that scene, we need to pop it in. I'm sure there are many challenges that come with how Has does it, but
you got to draw the line. You have to draw the line. I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great to be able to like go in and move shots around and change stuff. But at the end of the day, you know, for me, it's always that delivery date. You know, that's why I love the idea. That's why I go to EFM and meet like distributors and stuff and try get a delivery date, or whether it's a streaming release date or even a financing cutoff point. And then you kind of work your way backwards. You're like, okay, what is the amount of stuff I can do using the technique that I'm doing to get as much as possible? But you do have to draw the line, because also you just keep going forever. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, the production side is terrifying, because in normal movies, there are definitely two schools of thought, right? One is you're a Stanley Kubrick, although, you know, he obviously planned a lot, but you can still show up, rewrite the script on the day, right? Like, you know, Goddard would show up for Breathless with a napkin, and he would write out the day's script and hand it to people, and then they'd figure it out. With any real kind of interactivity, the structure becomes so important that you do have to outline, and you do have to have everything planned, right? You can't. And then the thing that always upsets my producers is, and again, working at like an indie budget level, they are used to having a script, having a plan, and then if something goes wrong, you improvise, right? And so it might be like, sorry, Sam, we're going to have to cut this scene. Could you add something to this other bit, or could you do this? And they're just used to like a certain level of, we're just going to lose a certain amount of stuff and we'll just deal with it. But the games I'm making, I'm like, we literally cannot lose a single scene. Like, we have play tested and balanced everything here. And so if we lose this scene, things go askew. And if we lose a second scene, then and now suddenly it's not working as well as a game. And obviously with like branching narratives, where you are trying to achieve that balance, and you need a certain frequency of choice and amount of choices, and all of that is pre-planned. If you show up and suddenly you have to start stripping stuff, then it fundamentally breaks, right? So it's
absolutely.
There is like a weird back and forth. Like, there was a point in like working in video games where, so like I worked on the Silent Hill series, and when I was involved, it was at the point where it kind of stopped making financial sense, because the series was known for having essentially cutting edge CGI characters, the most photorealistic, expressive faces. And on like a PlayStation 2, the cost of that made sense for this kind of psychological horror game. But as you kind of got to PS3 and PS4, the costs to render whatever was the cutting edge human face became the domain of like high-end big budget blockbuster games. And so there was a point then where, even when I made like Her Story, say, well, look, I'm just going to point a camera at an actor's face, and I'm getting almost for free this incredible like face performance. And so you had this, it became more efficient in some ways. But then when you do start getting more ambitious with your filmmaking, you do then start to remember the days of being able to just drop in a different location, or change a character's hairstyle, or relight a scene, or move things around. And so you're constantly kind of ping-ponging around the kind of efficiencies of things. But I mean, the number one thing I've heard from like the guys that run the Netflixes and stuff, when I've been in meetings with them, the number one metric that they're obsessed with is just how expensive their product is, right? If you make like you make a Game of Thrones, you make like a Last of Us, on HBO, they spend so much per episode, and generally 99% of people are watching it once. So they're aware that like their product is selling people Stranger Things or Last of Us or whatever the best show is, but they know that they're going to burn through a $20 million episode in 45 minutes. And that's terrifying to them. And then they hear about video games and they're like, wait a minute, you can make a $20 million video game and people might play it for 100 hours, right? And actually there's something inherently sticky about the content. Joining, that's when they kind of all swing and start looking at video games. So it's, yeah, unfortunately, yeah, the economics of it is always present.
I'm still playing like The Witcher 3 and Fallout 4. I think once it gets made, it's there forever, and you can go back and always discover something new. And I think that's the exciting part of video game and video game design, is that it allows the audience that freedom to explore it in their own way. Sam, did I read or see somewhere that when you were directing Telling Lies, I think one of your comments to the actors was you can change the dialogue, but there's certain words that you need to keep, and you were just letting them know the words. Is that right?
Oh, it was worse than that. So with that game, so if people haven't played Telling Lies, similar to Her Story, the core mechanic of the game is that you discover video clips by searching for the words that the people are going to speak in them. You're like, there's like a surveillance thing going on, bad government stuff. So before we get to the shoot, this is what you were saying earlier, we're working with like an indie film budget, so we're not going to have tons of reshoots. We can't build the game, shoot it, see if it works, and then go back and fix it all, right? So what we did on that project and all of our projects really is we have a prototype version of the game. When we write the script, we run all these kind of formulae and algorithms or whatever on the script to check and balance like the interconnectivity via the words that are used. So it might be that like, oh, this scene here is really hard to find, so we'll have to go in and rewrite it, and this word or someone's mentioning a character's name, but it's been used too much elsewhere, so we'll prune. You basically go in and you iterate on the script so that the connectivity via the words is really strong. And then we went and play tested it with basically a dummy version of the game where we just did like a read through of the whole script. So we're just filming actors' faces. So you didn't have all of the other kind of production values and stuff. But we had this dummy version and we tested that, had people play it for like 3 or 4 hours. And from that, made a few tweaks and balanced it. So then when we show up with the actors to shoot, they were not allowed to change a single word. Like, they had to be off book, word perfect. And as well, like Telling Lies was obscene because everything was shot through fictional webcams. And some of the scenes were 15 minutes long. So the actors had to be off book for 15 minutes without us being able to cut. Because you're looking at someone on a webcam, you can't just cut between takes because you see their face pop around. So that was like, and we were shooting like 20 pages a day. So it was unbelievable. Like Logan Marshall Green was a ridiculous just soldier getting in there and coming in every day like I have it. But what we did is we had our script team. So in a normal film, the script supervisor is there to look at like continuity and things, right? So they might be watching, they'll be like, oh, when we shot the different angle on this scene, like their hair was doing this and fix that, or, and they'll pay attention to those kinds of details. They're going through and marking through that you recorded every line and everything. So they're like the eyes and ears, the director's like second brain. On the Telling Lies shoot, we were like, none of that matters. You are, and we had this little program set up so that if an actor did change a word, they could type the word in and check if this was going to break everything, right? There were some words, and then if it did, we would reshoot like the whole scene. So you could get all the way to the end of like a 10-minute scene. Oh. The worst thing was, the game was designed so that like curse words were character specific. So like Carrie Bichet's character, who was the mother, had all the scatological swear words. I think Alex got to say the F word. But if an actor is in the moment. And obviously, if you're shooting 10 minutes and you're on camera constantly, and you're in this very immersive, different way of shooting, and they're really in their character and they're getting emotional, they're going to ad-lib swear words. And so that was like a constant problem. And then there was a couple of other words. It was like Detroit and baby. Baby was a killer. There was like all these through lines in the story about an actual baby, but people would also use it as a term of endearment. When we finished rapping, I gave everyone a T-shirt that said like "fuck Detroit, baby." That's to remind them of that. Yeah, so that was like this interesting thing of we'd get to the end of a shot and I'd be like, okay, I think that was really good. I'd look over to the scripty and I would run over and they would have like, these are the 3 words that were not in the script, but it's okay because they can say them and it's okay they said this and actually we can squeeze. And a couple of times where what they said did like affects the game balance, but we would quickly kind of look and see like, oh, it broke this bit, but we could, if we tweak the thing we haven't shot yet, maybe we can like scramble together. But yeah, that was fun for all the actors.
Well, I think it's wonderful because one of my questions was actually going to be some of the problems that come with this new form, or this, I guess, transgressive form. But I don't have to ask that anymore. It seems like that's a great, it's a wonderful.
Too many.
I think that if I were to summarize maybe some of the core elements that we've been talking about, it's that the new technology present isn't necessarily the determining factor, but rather just a facilitating factor for this kind of transgressive form of entertainment. Because something I've been hearing from all of you is the fact that it is a conscious kind of straying away from the archetypal norms often found, the restrictions. You're trying to forego as many as you can and tell your own story as a result of that. Your story, if you will, not her story. And I think that the really interesting element here is that it's so unbelievably kind of wide in scope. It's postmodern, it stems, as Sam mentioned, from literature, all the way back to, I don't know, Milorad Pavic and Nabokov, of interacting with the text in unique forms, to what we have today with video games and interactive film and things like that. So I think it's really fascinating to hear that. We were talking moments ago about new tech and how it facilitates new forms of, for example, prevising, right? Unreal 5 is being used on sets on Disney Plus, right? On The Mandalorian, they're just changing the set based on what they made in their little, what is it called? The volume, yes. Yeah. They're changing completely, just, move that barrel, move that box. It's wonderful. So with that in mind, can we talk about for a moment AI? You mentioned changes to people's faces, but now we have AI where we can completely recreate people, their voices, their mannerisms, everything. What are your thoughts on that?
Me and Haz were actually discussing this in Berlin. We were saying there's the new one that's come out that maps an actor's performance and can change the jaw to redub in any language, and the lips will follow that dubbing, which I think is fantastic because then it becomes, widely usable. I think it's really exciting. I think like ChatGPT, and all these other AIs that are coming out. Bing is releasing a big one, and Google is coming out. I think it's going to be fantastic because at the end of the day, a rule that Grace and I adhere to is, the tech is, whatever comes out, it has to just facilitate what's most important, and that's the story. It's always about a good story told well, and it doesn't matter how you approach it, whether that be a novel, a comic book, a video game, or a film. Essentially, it boils down to, is it going to resonate with people, and do they discover something about themselves whilst experiencing it? So, bring on AI, I say, and let's see where the story goes.
There is a lot of ethical thing. And I think we were speaking about it, Harry, about the ethical side of AI, and there's places like ArtStation that are really there's a friend of mine, Alvaro, who's this amazing Unreal Engine artist director, and he's really made it a mission to stamp out AI in creativity. And that's fine, that's him. But for me, it's interesting because it's like what you said, Harry, it doesn't really matter how this thing was made. At the end of the day, it's about a good friggin' story. It's the story that matters. Like when we did Rift, we showed the first 10 minutes in 2021 to some executives, like, you know, just film it Hollywood executives. And we had the Unreal Engine logo appear at the start because, you know, they were co-financiers on the film. And people just assume, oh, it's a video game. It's not true animation. Even though the thing was stylized the hell out, it was 2D toon. They just had it in their head it was going to be a video game because it's by the makers of Fortnite and so on. So, and then like 7-8 months later, we did another like test screening with just the dailies, and we removed the Unreal Engine logo. We didn't have any mention of the game engine. We just said, here's this animated film that we're working on. Here's a screen test. They totally made notes based on an animated film. And so that goes back to AI. Like, you know, at the moment, if you just ask to say, hey, I made an Unreal Engine movie, like come out of Unreal Engine, all in final pixels, and there's AI in there, there's ChatGPT used for like for dialogue, people just start thinking, oh, it's not a proper movie, or it's not a proper game, or whatever. Even though we use AI in games all the time, they just will just look at it differently. So I think it's just a tool, man. Like for anything, you know, we're using tons of tools to make video games, you know, from the way we do our assets to the way we're doing NPC AIs. We're using smart AI at the moment in one of our games, which is phenomenal, you know, to the way you're doing music, the way you handle sound. It's all tools, man. So I think AI is just going to be a tool. I think people at the moment are advertising it too much. Hey, I made this AI thing in Mid-Journey. I was like, oh, here we go, another Mid-Journey thing. But yeah.
And I might sound ignorant by saying this, but I don't think that AI will ever get to the point of reinventing something so drastically as Sam did with the way, you know, you tackle a narrative retrospect as a whole. Yeah. You know, it maybe it might, I don't know, but we're just, you know, when you're
I think it being branded as AI is like this huge misleading thing that I think sets a lot of people off, right? Because with the visual stuff, you're basically talking about this mass mulchy montage thing. And then like with the chat stuff, when I speak to people, so many people don't realize this thing is making up the word one word at a time as it goes through based on statistical properties of having read every single thing that was ever written by humans, right? But it has no awareness or brain, right? It's not really intelligence. It sounds intelligent because it is trained on how we have written things for 100 years. The bit that always gets me is like, yeah, coming from video games, and you know, when I said, you know, with Silent Hill, it got to the point where it was just so expensive to make this CGI stuff that it became a problem. There are always going to be useful tools, and I think like I have lots of friends that have been doing kind of procedural, systemic narrative things for like the last 20, 30 years, and the ones who are like the experts will always say, none of this is any good for actually writing the narrative. This is really good for like fixing the little problems, right? And have, you know, all the edge cases, the weird little edge cases, and just wrapping up certain things. And so I can imagine all sorts of, you know, tools for the AI when it comes to, you know, just the sheer volume of like boring stuff that you have to do in CGI, right? Of like, oh, we need to blend these textures, we need to create this material, we need to, we already, you know, if you anyone that's making a game that's set in the outdoors is already using like procedural tools to lay down foliage and trees and grass, right? You could rebrand that as like grass GPT or whatever, I don't know, and be like, we're using AI grass, but that's how it works. I mean, but the thing that really gets to me, especially when you start to talk about the stuff that the newspapers love to write about, which I think is the most misleading, which is, you know, this idea that the fun creative bit will come from the machines. It's just humans are cheaper. Like, there are so many amazing writers out there who are, you know, living paycheck to paycheck, who will write for free for like, there's not a dearth of writers out there to write this stuff. And I think like this, when you play with ChatGPT and you're like, write me a screenplay, write me page 1 of a screenplay in which Scrooge McDuck, you know, meets Sharon Stone or whatever. And it's kind of fun, like a game of consequences, because it looks like a real screenplay and it's got stuff that seems to answer what you're doing. But I've yet to see anything that is genuinely better than if you just sat a writer down and said, you got 2 minutes, go. And they just like dumped their brain onto the paper. There's going to be something a little bit more real or interesting or specific in there. So, you know, I think all of the problems we have with this medium, so many of them are like business problems of like, who's going to pay for this? What is the business model of Netflix in 10 years? You know, what is the difference between a movie business model and a games business model? You know, those are all problems. You know, there are problems of technology. But, you know, I think the creative, the side of things, of having the ideas, of creating the things, of performing, like there are always going to be more actors than you need. There are always going to be more writers. And I think there's something, you know, for me, when I go to a piece of art, I really want that human connection. I want to feel like I've learned something about somebody, and you know, not explicitly, but you just have this sense of having interacted, and that's like fundamental to our humanity. Is we have all this brain tech that is about looking at people's faces and talking to people and listening to them and reading body language. Then you know, I think that you know is ultimately the thing. Like I watched a movie the other night on a plane. It was like a Liam Neeson movie. Apologies if anyone watching worked on this movie. And it was like, I don't know, the 10th or 20th Liam Neeson is like a badass whose family get kidnapped movie. And I watched it, and it was so formulaic. And like there wasn't a line of dialogue in the whole thing that had anything. Like it was just, every twist was obvious. Every moment, every beat, every scene, everything was so formulaic. It could have been written by an AI, like, you know. So I think that, to me, that like it just isn't a place we need to go. It's like, let people write the interesting things, you know, solve the issue where someone needs that Liam Neeson movie so badly that they're just, you know, someone's writing it in a day, even and then having to spend 2 weeks shooting the car chases. Like, you know, there are all these other things we can solve for before we have to worry about like the AI writing the next Shakespeare or something.
It's the human gut instinct though, right? I mean, that's the thing that I don't think AI will ever take over. Like I've read tons and tons of scripts, right? I get scripts sent to me all the time from my agents and stuff. And the ones that really grab my attention are not the ones that are written in such detail. I've seen scripts that are really short, but there's a voice behind it. And you know, when you read it from page one, and even the way the dialogue's written, even the way the descriptions are written, you can tell that description is written by that artist. There's a voice to it. And I don't think, you know, when I read a lot of the AI stuff, there isn't so much a voice to it. Like I read a lot of comedy action scripts. I love comedy action scripts. And you can tell like the person writing it is funny. And then you meet the writer, you have a Zoom call with them and say, hey, love your script. We should talk about developing this further. They are extremely funny themselves. So, and I don't think an AI could ever replicate that. So yeah, I mean, like what you're saying, Sam, I think like, yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, like there are tons of writers out there and there's something that makes them stand out than a machine. Now, Harry, whether we'll get to that point, I don't know, it's when Skynet takes over, who knows? But like, I think art is something that is based on human instinct. It's that feeling. You know, whenever I go look at a painting at the Tate, I get emotionally moved because of there's something that painter's doing in that piece of work that's just resonate with me. And I think that's something that AI just not right now can do.
I think that's the same with all the tools that we're using. As Taz was saying, they are just tools at the end of the day that we're utilizing to boost our creativity. But at the end, you know, the creativity will always come from the writer, the director, the people behind those stories. And, you know, we're just enhancing those stories by the tools that we're using. And people are saying that AI, you know, script writers are going to be redundant. But going off Sam's point, they never will be, because AI will never understand how to empathize with characters, how to really tap into human emotion like scriptwriters do. So, you know, to your point, Daniel, I think it will be utilized, but it will never overtake the human creative rite of passage. Yeah.
Well, I love everyone's answer here, and I don't want to cut a great conversation short, but we are running out of time, and I want to get one last thing from you guys before I let you guys go on your merry way. But it seems as though that, as Sam pointed out, you know, there are formulaic elements to media, to all art, and then there's elements that aren't, that rebel against it. And from what I understand from this point now, 7 years of film school, is that every great artistic movement was founded on transgression and rebelling against a prior format. You know, modernism against romanticism. You know, the French New Wave against 1940s Hollywood. You know, this is like a huge kind of transgressive movement, and each one of you is a pioneer in that in their own way. So before we wrap up, I would love to ask each one of you in order in spirit of the film festival, of any film festival, any art festival in general, is to turn people on to great art that might not be heard of. So I would love to hear each one of you guys, what is something that you want everyone here and everyone listening to check out on their own time, whether it be a film, game, or whatever, maybe a book. And then what have you been working on recently that you want to shout out as well? Harry, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we it's a catch-22. You consume so much content to get inspiration and think, but at the same time, you're so busy editing or writing or working that you don't have enough time to see anything. I'll come back to the inspiration bit in a sec, or do you know what? I'm going to say anything that's an FMV at the moment. I think go onto Steam, PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo. Just have a look, because it's a new, different format. People see game. It's the same thing with games as well. People see games in a certain type, and what we're trying to do brings a new light to bridge the two fields together. So if you haven't checked out anything that's interactive, pick it up. We worked in VR for 4 years, and that's a different one as well. Try a headset, try something new. You might really like it. As far as what we've been working on, we, as I said, we're in VR. We created 4 interactive sort of VR feature films, but we've come out of that and onto the more sort of hopefully more mass market. And we've got our first feature film, The Isletide Hotel, releasing this summer on all major gaming platforms. And it's about an absent father who must rescue his teenage daughter from an eclectic cult before their final night at the Isletide Hotel. Think Wes Anderson meets video games, if I could be so bold as to even suggest that. But it's a film about fatherhood, parenthood, and that change in a person's identity. So that's what we've been busy doing.
So that is the Isletide Hotel, releasing this summer. Everyone check it out. What about, so I'm going to go to Grace here because I know you work with Chadwick, so I'm sure you'll call out this, Harry, calling out, the same kind of thing. But I'd love to hear, what have you been engaging with that you want other people to?
Like Harry said, that's a really hard question, Daniel, to put us on the spot with. I'm going to go flatter the people on our Zoom call, because they really are pioneers of this new genre and what we're doing. And obviously it goes without saying that Harry and I wouldn't do what we're doing without people like Sam sort of paving the way and opening those doors. So Sam's body of work is phenomenal. He just released Immortality. I'm sure he'll talk about that later. And Haz is, I've listened to Haz talk before, and he's doing phenomenal work with doing something completely different using Game Engine. So both of these guys, their work is definitely something to check out.
100%. What about you, Haz?
I'm not sure we can beat what Grace just said. I mean, she just popped on there. Okay,
just flattering you all.
I mean, obviously, check out the work that these lovely people on this call are doing. Obviously, that's the first I'll tell everyone to check out. For me, I've been reading this book by this amazing music producer called Rick Rubin, and the book is called Creativity. And it's an interesting book because it's a book that deals with the sort of like spirituality. I'm not a spiritual person. It's about spirituality of creativity, the things to look at. Like you'll say, just spend time looking out the window, or just spend time looking at people, listening to people, the way they talk, the way they interact, because it has an influence to your work. In fact, anything that we do, this conversation, for example, or I have dinner later on, it has a somehow subconscious influence. So I would say read that book. What I'm currently working on now is obviously getting Rift released. So tons of meetings of distributors and sales companies and streamers and so on. But we're also developing, we're going to be at GDC, Game Developers Conference, next month. We're showing the Rift game as part of the Microsoft ID Xbox program that we're part of. And also I'm directing the game cinematics for this movie called Dune, which is a big, massive open world game. And I'm the cinematics director for that. So, that's keeping me busy. Yeah.
Didn't they just have a cinematic a couple of months back for that?
Yeah, that was my trailer.
Yeah,
that was my
wonderful job. It was awesome. It was awesome. I remember watching it live.
It was the thing that I wasn't allowed to talk about for the entire of last year. And then when the trailer came out, the Games Award, I'm like, yes, finally. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, great job on that as well. I'm excited to see what happens there. Last but not least, Sam, coming hot off the heels of Immortality with what, 3 Game of the Year nominate, or no, Best Performance, Best Narrative, and Best Game Direction nominations at the Game Awards. So congratulations there. Recommendations.
I learned a lot. I learned you shouldn't release a video game in the same year as Elden Ring and God of War. If anyone out there is developing a video game, check first: is Elden Ring coming out the same year? Yeah, no, yeah. We've been having like that's been crazy in that it started with like Herstory in 2015, but prior to that, like if you're making an independent video game, the reach of it and you wouldn't be in the Game Awards, you would be in some indie Game Awards thing or something, right? It was very kind of segregated between the different budget tiers, but the ability now to put out Immortality and get nominated alongside Elden Ring and God of War and being with a fighting chance is kind of cool. So yeah, I just released my company put out end of August last year, a game called Immortality, which is a game about an actress who starts out at the end of the 60s, only ever shoots 3 movies, and none of these movies is ever released, and the actress has disappeared. So ostensibly the idea of the game is to go in 2023 now, and you've discovered this cache of lost footage from these movies. And in watching the footage, learn about what happened to this actress, Marissa Marcel. We have this cool mechanic where you can at any point pause the footage and click on any object on screen, whether that's an actor's face or a prop or a piece of imagery, and it will then perform a match cut dynamically to another scene. And so you kind of discover new footage by creating these little kind of montages, all of your own devising. So it's kind of exploratory and expressive, and also like exploring the idea of randomness, which is a huge part of video games, right? If you play a Diablo or something, like the randomness of a loot drop is clearly a big draw, or even like a fruit machine game. And Immortality was us trying to find an interesting way of giving the player expressivity and intentionality. They can choose what they want to click on, but then the game will surprise you. And in doing that, preserve like the magic of a cinematic cut, because you don't quite know where you're going to go to. And there's and then there's some secrets to dig into and discover in that game. So you can go play that on it's on Xbox, it's on Game Pass, it's on Steam for PC, soon Mac, and you can play it on phones via Netflix Games. In terms of recommendations, this is a weird one. I did another podcast recently, and I was talking about this obsession of mine, and the person I was on the podcast with, it was all alien to them. So hopefully it'll be alien to everyone else. But there was, like, in the spirit of, it's fascinating how little of the history of video gaming and interactivity we have all retained. Like, so many weird, interesting experiments that happened that we aren't aware of, and we think that whatever we're doing is, so cool and brand new and cutting edge. But there was this trend during the 80s called bookware, where all the big publishers like Activision, EA, thought that the big hot thing was going to be bringing in authors from the real world to make interactive books. And so they put out things like, there's a game called Portal, not the more famous Portal, by Rod Swigert, which is this fascinating sci-fi told through a database. There's is it Robert Dish or Thomas Dish did this game called Amnesia, again, not the famous Amnesia, that's about a guy waking up naked in a hotel room in New York. And the pitch of the game was that you could go to any single street crossing in New York, and it's all simulated in this text game. That ends up being slightly tedious in the game, but it's like a fascinating experiment. Robert Pinsky, who became the poet laureate, wrote this game called Mind Wheel, which is actually one of the better pieces of bookware. But there's so much of this stuff. There's a website actually called the Digital Antiquarian, is the best place to go if you want to deep dive into the history of video gaming, of narrative gaming. This guy does these incredible deep dives into these things. He covered Night Trap, which is another fascinating offshoot, right? You dig into Night Trap and it involves Hasbro, and then it goes back to oh man, my brain's not working today. I haven't had enough coffee yet. The guy who invented video gaming. God damn it. Yeah, like this. You think Night Trap was just this weird thing on the Sega CD, but you realize like how long it had been in development. It started out on video cassettes. All these great minds involved. Huge companies like Hasbro being like, "Oh, this is going to be the future. We need to get in on this." And then you have the U.S. Congress getting involved with Night Trap, right? And games ratings. Like, there's so much interesting history there. So yeah, if people are interested in exploring this space, are themselves trying to innovate, like it's always it's 50% humbling and 50% inspiring to go back and be like, oh shit, like in 1981, these really cool people, not to extend this, I'll get one more anecdote, but the most useless and pathetic and humbled I ever felt was I was lucky enough when we showed something at Tribeca to have dinner with Robert De Niro and some other people, but Robert De Niro is the most famous. And at some point, they were like going around the table and they introduced what I did. And because in person, Robert De Niro reminded me very much of like a grandfather. He's like smaller than you'd think, right? And he's getting older. So I proceeded to mansplain for 5 minutes the concept of interactive movies, games, FMV, everything, right? He patiently sat there and listened. And when I finished speaking, he was like, yeah, I made one of those in the 90s. And like Robert De Niro made this actually like not terrible, like interactive CD-ROM adventure game in the 90s. I was like, damn it, telling Grandpa how stuff excellent. But yeah, it's super interesting to be like, oh shit, people have done these things. And even though, you know, the technology they had in 1983 or whatever was you know, much more limited than it was today, the ideas were still there and people were trying these things, and it's interesting to see what did or didn't work. You know, so that's definitely a fun thing to go dive into.
Well, thank you so much. I want to say again, thank you everyone here for joining us today. And again, the less talking I do, the better the panel goes. So like, I'm really happy that everyone here was so engaged and so willing to give these like wonderful answers to these kind of open-ended questions. Again, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for sitting here with us, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of AFF and enjoy the rest of, you know, the year, and good luck on all of your future endeavors. Okay, everyone, keep us updated.
Thank you very much, Daniel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Daniel.
Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
everyone.
much.